The security camera footage from Denver General Hospital would later become one of the most haunting pieces of evidence in a case that gripped the nation. At 3:47 a.m. on a cold November morning, the automatic doors slid open and a small figure stumbled through the fluorescent-lit entrance. 8-year-old Emma Richardson clutched her baby brother against her chest, her tiny frame shaking from exhaustion and cold. Her voice, barely above a whisper but captured clearly by the hospital's audio system, would echo in the minds of everyone who heard it. "Mama's gone. She told me to find you, Papa." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What the cameras couldn't capture was the 3-day journey that brought them there. What they couldn't show was the terror, the determination, and the fierce love that drove a child to cross 2 states with nothing but a baby, a crumpled piece of paper, and her mother's dying words. The storm had been building for hours over the small town of Cedar Falls, Montana. Emma Richardson pressed her face against the cold window of their trailer, watching the lightning crack across the dark sky. Her mother, Sarah, moved slowly around their cramped living space, her breathing labored and shallow. She'd been sick for weeks now, though she tried to hide it from Emma and 3-month-old Tommy. "Mama, are you okay?" Emma asked, turning from the window. Sarah was leaning heavily against the kitchen counter, one hand pressed to her chest. "I'm fine, sweetheart," Sarah managed, though her face was pale as moonlight. "Just tired." But Emma wasn't fooled. She'd seen the way her mother struggled to lift Tommy lately, the way she'd disappear into the bathroom for long periods, emerging with red-rimmed eyes. At 8 years old, Emma had learned to read the signs that adults thought they were hiding. The trailer creaked in the wind. It wasn't much: 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a living area that served as Emma's playroom during the day and Sarah's workspace at night when she took in sewing to make ends meet. But it was theirs, and it was the only home Emma had ever known. Sarah had moved them here when Emma was 5, after her father, David Richardson, had left for his deployment overseas. He was supposed to come back. That's what Sarah always said. But 3 years had passed, and the letters had stopped coming months ago. The last address they had was for a military hospital in Denver, where he was recovering from injuries sustained in combat. "Emma, come here," Sarah called softly, settling slowly onto the worn couch. Her voice had that quality it got when she needed to tell Emma something important. Gentle, but serious. Emma climbed up beside her mother, and Sarah wrapped an arm around her small shoulders. Tommy gurgled from his bassinet nearby, his tiny fists waving in the air. "I need you to listen very carefully," Sarah began, her hand trembling slightly as she smoothed Emma's dark hair. "You know how we've been talking about finding your daddy?" Emma nodded. They'd been having more of these conversations lately, usually late at night when Sarah thought Emma was asleep. But the trailer walls were thin, and Emma had heard her mother making phone calls, trying to track down David's location, dealing with endless bureaucracy and dead ends. "I found him," Sarah whispered, and Emma's heart leaped. "He's in Denver, at the Veterans Hospital. He's been hurt, Emma, but he's alive. Can we go see him?" Emma asked eagerly. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and she pulled Emma closer. "I can't make that trip, baby. I'm too sick. But you're strong, Emma. Stronger than any little girl should have to be." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Emma felt something cold settle in her stomach, though she didn't fully understand what her mother was trying to tell her. "What do you mean, Mama?" Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. Emma recognized her mother's careful handwriting, the same neat script that labeled all of Emma's school supplies and wrote grocery lists stuck to their refrigerator. "This is your daddy's information," Sarah said, pressing the paper into Emma's small hands. "His full name, the hospital where he's staying, his room number. I wrote down everything." Emma stared at the paper, the words swimming slightly in her vision. David Michael Richardson, Denver Veterans Hospital, room 314. Emma, I need you to promise me something, Sarah continued, her voice growing weaker. If something happens to me, if I get too sick to take care of you and Tommy, I need you to take this paper and find your daddy. Can you do that for me? Nothing's going to happen to you, Mama, Emma said quickly, fear creeping into her voice. You're going to get better. I hope so, sweetheart. But sometimes grown-ups get sick, and medicine can't fix everything. Your daddy doesn't know about Tommy yet. He doesn't know he has his son. But when he sees you both, when he holds his children, Sarah's voice broke slightly. He'll take care of you. He'll love you both so much. Emma wanted to argue, wanted to insist that her mother would be fine, that they'd all go to Denver together as a family. But something in Sarah's eyes, something in the way she held Emma just a little too tightly, made the words stick in her throat. The storm outside intensified, rain lashing against the windows. Sarah spent the next hour going over important details with Emma, where she kept the emergency money hidden in a coffee can behind the flour, how to change Tommy's diaper, how to make a bottle. Emma absorbed it all with the serious concentration of a child who sensed that her world was about to change forever. The bus station is downtown, Sarah explained, her breathing becoming more labored. Show them this address, and they'll help you get to Denver. People are kind to children traveling alone, especially when they understand you're trying to find family. Mama, you're scaring me, Emma whispered. I know, baby. But I need to know you'll be brave if you have to be. You've always been my brave girl. That night, Emma lay in her small bed, listening to her mother's increasingly difficult breathing from the next room. Tommy's soft cries punctuated the darkness, and she heard Sarah getting up repeatedly to tend to him, each movement seemingly more difficult than the last. Emma must have dozed because she woke to complete silence. The storm had passed, leaving behind an eerie calm that felt heavier than the thunder had been. Pale morning light filtered through her thin curtains, and she realized what had woken her, the absence of sound. No labored breathing from her mother's room, no movement. Just silence, Mama. She called softly, climbing out of bed. No response. Emma padded across the cold linoleum floor to her mother's bedroom. Sarah lay still in her bed, her face peaceful but unnaturally pale. Tommy was awake in his bassinet, fussing quietly, his small face red from crying. Mama, Emma whispered again, reaching out to touch her mother's hand. It was cold. The realization hit Emma like a physical blow. She'd seen death before, a bird that had flown into their window, a neighbor's old cat. She knew what it meant when something stopped moving, stopped breathing, stopped being alive. Her mother was gone. For several minutes, Emma simply stood there, holding her mother's cold hand, trying to process what this meant. Tommy's cries grew more insistent, and the sound jolted her into action. She had to take care of her baby brother. That's what her mother would want. With shaking hands, Emma prepared a bottle the way Sarah had taught her, testing the temperature on her wrist. She picked up Tommy, surprised by how heavy he felt, and settled into the rocking chair to feed him. As he drank, she stared at her mother's still form and felt something hard and determined settle in her chest. She knew what she had to do. Emma spent the morning gathering supplies. She found the coffee can behind the flour. There were several crumpled bills inside, more money than Emma had ever seen at once. She packed Tommy's diapers, formula, and clothes into her school backpack, along with a change of clothes for herself. The crumpled paper with her father's information went into her jacket pocket, where she could feel it against her chest. She tried not to look at her mother as she worked, focusing instead on the practical tasks ahead. Tommy needed to eat every few hours. She had enough formula for maybe 2 days if she was careful. The money would have to cover bus tickets and food. Before leaving, Emma wrote a note in her careful 8-year-old handwriting and left it on the kitchen table. I took Tommy to find Papa. Mama said to. She's sleeping and won't wake up, Emma Richardson. Then she bundled Tommy in his warmest blankets, shouldered her backpack, and stepped out into the cold Montana morning. The trailer door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like the end of everything she'd ever known. The walk to downtown Cedar Falls took 45 minutes with Tommy in her arms. He was heavier than she'd expected, and she had to stop several times to rest and readjust her grip. People they passed looked at her curiously. A small girl carrying a baby was unusual, but no one stopped to ask questions. The bus station was a small building with a few plastic chairs and a ticket window staffed by an elderly man with kind eyes. Emma approached the counter, Tommy sleeping against her shoulder. "I need to go to Denver," she said, standing on her tiptoes to see over the counter. "To the Veterans Hospital." The man, his name tag read Bill, looked down at her with surprise. "Where are your parents, honey?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Emma had rehearsed this conversation in her head during the walk. "My mama is sick and she sent me to find my daddy. He's at the hospital in Denver." She pulled out some of the crumpled bills. "I have money." Bill studied her for a long moment, and Emma held her breath. If he refused to sell her tickets, if he called someone, if he tried to stop her. "The bus to Denver leaves in 2 hours, he said finally. "But it's a long trip, sweetheart. Are you sure you can manage with the baby?" "Yes, sir," Emma said firmly. "I have to." Something in her voice, perhaps the absolute certainty of a child who had no other choice, convinced him. He sold her 2 tickets, one for her and one for Tommy, though babies usually rode free. Emma suspected he was being kind, giving her official documentation that she was supposed to be traveling. Those 2 hours were the longest of Emma's life. She sat in the plastic chair, Tommy in her lap, watching every person who entered the small station. Part of her expected someone to come looking for her, to have discovered what happened at the trailer. But Cedar Falls was a small town where people minded their own business, and trailer parks were places where folks often kept to themselves. When the bus finally arrived, a large Greyhound with Denver displayed above the windshield, Emma felt a mixture of terror and relief. This was really happening. She was really leaving everything she'd ever known to find a father she barely remembered. The bus driver, a middle-aged woman with graying hair, helped Emma up the steep steps. "Traveling alone, honey?" she asked gently. "I'm going to see my daddy," Emma replied. The same answer she'd been giving anyone who asked. The woman nodded and showed Emma to a seat near the front. "You holler if you need anything, okay?" As the bus pulled away from Cedar Falls, Emma pressed her face to the window and watched her hometown disappear behind them. The trailer park where she'd lived her entire life, the school where she was supposed to be in 3rd grade, the grocery store where her mother bought their food, all of it faded into the distance. Tommy stirred in her arms, and she looked down at his small face. He had their father's eyes, Sarah had always said. Emma hoped that was true. She hoped that when David Richardson saw those eyes, he would remember the family he'd left behind and understand that they needed him now more than ever. The bus rumbled down the highway, carrying them toward an uncertain future. Emma clutched the piece of paper in her pocket and whispered a promise to her sleeping brother. "I'm going to find Papa. Tommy. Mama told me to, and I will." Outside, the Montana landscape rolled past, vast and empty and beautiful in its loneliness. Emma had never been this far from home before. She'd never been anywhere, really. But as the miles passed beneath them, she felt something growing inside her chest. Not fear, though there was plenty of that. Not sadness, though grief for her mother sat heavy in her heart. It was determination. Pure, unwavering determination. To complete the mission her mother had given her. She would find David Richardson. She would place his son in his arms. And somehow, impossibly, they would become a family. The bus carried them south through the afternoon, and Emma Richardson, 8 years old and responsible for a life more precious than her own, began the most important journey of her young life. The Greyhound's diesel engine hummed beneath them as they crossed into Wyoming, the landscape shifting from Montana's rolling hills to endless stretches of prairie. Emma had been on the bus for 6 hours now, and Tommy was growing restless in her arms. She'd fed him twice, changed his diaper in the cramped bus bathroom with trembling hands, and sung every lullaby her mother had ever taught her. Other passengers had begun to notice them. A businessman in a wrinkled suit kept glancing over, his brow furrowed with concern. An elderly woman across the aisle had offered Emma a granola bar, which she'd accepted gratefully, suddenly realizing she hadn't eaten since the night before. "Where's your mama, sweetie?" the woman asked softly, leaning across the narrow aisle. Emma's throat tightened. She'd prepared for this question, but actually answering it felt like swallowing glass. She couldn't come. I'm going to my daddy." The woman's eyes softened with understanding that went deeper than Emma realized. That's a long way for such a little girl. "I'm not little," Emma replied with the fierce dignity of childhood. "I'm 8, and Tommy needs his papa." The woman smiled sadly and pressed something into Emma's hand, a $20 bill. "For your journey, honey, make sure you eat something." As afternoon melted into evening, the bus made its scheduled stop in Cheyenne. Emma watched through the window as passengers disembarked to stretch their legs and grab food from the stations. Vending machines. Her stomach was cramped with hunger, but she was afraid to leave the bus, afraid someone might ask too many questions or realize she was traveling alone with a baby. The bus driver appeared beside her seat. "You getting off to eat, honey?" Emma shook her head quickly. "We're okay." The driver studied her for a moment, then disappeared. She returned 15 minutes later with a sandwich, a bag of chips, and a bottle of water. "Here you go, no charge." Emma wanted to cry at the kindness. Instead, she whispered, "Thank you. What's your name, sweetheart?" "Emma. This is Tommy." "I'm Linda. I've got grandkids about your age." Linda crouched down to Emma's eye level. "Where exactly in Denver are you headed?" Emma pulled out the crumpled paper, now soft from handling. "The Veterans Hospital. My daddy's there." Linda's expression grew more serious. "That's a big place, Emma. Do you know how to get there from the bus station?" Emma's confidence wavered for the first time. She'd been so focused on getting to Denver that she hadn't thought about what came after. I'll figure it out." "Tell you what," Linda said gently. "When we get to Denver tomorrow morning, I'll make sure you get connected with someone who can help you find your way. Deal?" Emma nodded, relief flooding through her. Maybe the grown-ups her mother had talked about, the kind ones who helped children, were real after all. The bus pulled back onto the highway as darkness fell. Most passengers dozed in their seats, but Emma remained awake, watching the scattered lights of small towns flash past the window. Tommy slept fitfully, and she found herself memorizing his face in the dim light, the way his tiny fingers curled against her chest, the soft sound of his breathing, the complete trust he placed in her to keep him safe. Somewhere in the darkness between Cheyenne and Denver, Emma made a discovery that changed everything. She was digging through her backpack for another diaper when her fingers found something unexpected, an envelope tucked into the inner pocket, something her mother must have placed there without Emma knowing. Inside was a letter written in Sarah's careful handwriting, along with another $100 in cash. Emma held the letter up to catch the light from the window and began to read. "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, it means you've started the journey I prayed you'd never have to make. I'm so sorry, baby girl. Sorry that I got sick, sorry that you have to be braver than any child should be. Sorry that I can't be there to hold your hand through what comes next. But I'm not sorry for the little girl you've become. You are stronger than you know, kinder than the world deserves, and more capable than anyone would guess by looking at your small hands. You've been taking care of me for months now, though you thought I didn't notice. Making sure I took my medicine. Bringing me water when I was too tired to ask. Entertaining Tommy when I needed rest. You've been my helper, my strength, my reason to keep fighting as long as I could. Your daddy doesn't know you're coming. The last letter I received from him was months ago, and I couldn't bring myself to tell him how sick I was getting. I wanted to be strong for him the way you've been strong for me. But David Richardson is a good man, Emma. He loved us more than life itself when he left for the war. And I believe that love is still there, buried under whatever hurt and confusion the war left behind. When you find him, when you put Tommy in his arms, you tell him that Sarah never stopped believing he'd come home to us. Tell him that every day I loved him, even when the letters stopped coming, even when the silence stretched so long, I wondered if he'd forgotten us entirely. And tell him that you are the best parts of both of us, rolled up into one incredible little girl who deserves a daddy who will love her the way I do. The money in this envelope should get you where you need to go once you reach Denver. Don't trust just anyone, but remember that most people are good, especially when they see a child who needs help. Use your judgment. You've always been wise beyond your years. I love you more than all the stars in the sky, Emma Richardson. Take care of your brother, find your father, and remember that wherever I am, I'm proud of the woman you're already becoming. All my love, forever. Mama. Emma read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face in the darkened bus. Other passengers slept around her, unaware that her world had just shifted again. Her mother had known. Sarah had known she was dying, had planned this journey, had prepared Emma as much as any mother could prepare a child for the impossible. The weight of responsibility felt heavier now, but also somehow more manageable. She wasn't just a scared little girl running away from tragedy. She was completing a mission her mother had carefully planned, carrying out Sarah's final act of love for her family. Emma folded the letter carefully and tucked it back into the envelope with the money. Then she settled Tommy more securely in her arms and finally allowed herself to sleep. She woke to Linda gently shaking her shoulder. "We're here, honey, Denver." Emma blinked in the early morning light streaming through the bus windows. The city sprawled around them, bigger than anything she'd ever seen. Buildings reached toward the sky like concrete mountains, and traffic moved in streams of metal and glass that made her dizzy to watch. The bus station was chaos, people rushing in every direction, announcements echoing over loudspeakers, the smell of exhaust and coffee and humanity all mixed together. Emma clutched Tommy closer, suddenly understanding how small she was in this vast urban landscape. Linda helped her off the bus and walked her to the information desk. "This young lady needs to get to the Veterans Hospital," she told the clerk, a tired-looking man with kind eyes. "You traveling alone, sweetheart?" he asked Emma. Emma nodded, not trusting her voice. "The hospital's about 20 minutes by bus," he explained, pulling out a city map. "But that's a lot of transfers for someone your age. Tell you what, let me call you a taxi. It'll cost more, but it's safer." Emma pulled out some of the money from her mother's envelope. "I can pay." The clerk made the call, and within minutes, a yellow cab pulled up outside the station. Linda walked Emma to the car, and for a moment, Emma wanted to throw her arms around this stranger who had shown her such kindness. Instead, she said simply, "Thank you for helping us." "You take care of yourself and that baby," Linda replied, her voice thick with emotion. "And Emma, your mama would be proud of how brave you're being." The taxi ride through Denver was like traveling through another world. Emma pressed her face to the window, watching the city wake up around them. People hurried along sidewalks with coffee cups and briefcases. Construction crews worked on towering buildings. And everywhere there was movement and noise and life on a scale she'd never imagined. "First time in the big city?" the taxi driver asked. He was an older man with graying hair and a gentle voice. "Yes, sir. Visiting someone at the hospital?" Emma's heart began to race as they drew closer to their destination. My daddy. He's been hurt. I'm sure he'll be real happy to see you, the driver said softly. The Denver Veterans Hospital rose before them like a fortress of glass and steel. It was enormous, with multiple wings and towers, parking lots full of cars, and a steady stream of people moving in and out of its many entrances. Emma stared up at it through the taxi window, feeling smaller than ever. Which entrance do you need, honey? The driver asked. Emma looked at the paper again. Room 314. That'll be the main entrance. You just go to the information desk, and they'll tell you how to find your daddy's room. Emma paid the fare with shaking hands, leaving a generous tip because the driver had been kind. He helped her out of the car and watched as she walked toward the hospital's main entrance, Tommy sleeping peacefully in her arms. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, and Emma stepped into the lobby. It was bright and clean, with polished floors that reflected the overhead lights. A large information desk dominated the center of the space, staffed by several people in uniform. Families sat in clusters of chairs, some crying, some laughing, all dealing with the complex emotions that hospitals seem to generate. Emma approached the desk, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. A young woman with a name tag reading Janet looked up at her with surprise. Can I help you, sweetie? Emma pulled out the crumpled paper one more time. Her mother's careful handwriting seemed to blur as she spoke. I'm looking for David Michael Richardson. He's in room 314. Janet typed something into her computer, then looked back at Emma with growing concern. Are you here with your family, honey? This is my family, Emma said, adjusting Tommy in her arms. David Richardson is my daddy. My mama sent me to find him. Janet glanced around the lobby, clearly looking for adult supervision that wasn't there. Sweetie, where are your parents? Emma felt tears building behind her eyes, but she forced them back. She'd come too far to break down now. Mama's gone, she whispered. She told me to find Papa. She said he's here, and he doesn't know about Tommy yet, but when he sees us... Her voice cracked slightly. When he sees us, he'll take care of us. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with desperation and hope and the absolute faith of a child who had nowhere else to turn. Janet's expression softened, and Emma saw something she'd been seeing a lot lately. Adults realizing that sometimes children had to carry burdens no child should bear. Let me make a phone call, Janet said gently. You just wait right here, okay? Emma sank into one of the lobby chairs, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Tommy stirred in her arms, making soft sounds that meant he'd be hungry soon. She had one bottle left, maybe enough formula for 2 more feedings after that. The money would buy more, but first she had to find her father. As she waited, Emma looked around the lobby at the other families. A woman about her mother's age sat crying while a man in uniform held her hand. An elderly couple shared a sandwich, speaking in quiet, worried voices. A little boy not much older. Then Emma colored in a book while his parents talked to a doctor. All these people had someone. All these people belonged somewhere, had someone to take care of them when things went wrong. Emma had traveled across 2 states carrying her baby brother, following her mother's final instructions, believing that at the end of this journey was a man who would remember that he had a family, that he had children who needed him. In just a few minutes, she would find out if that faith had been misplaced. Janet returned with a security guard and a woman in a white coat who Emma guessed was a doctor or nurse. They approached her with careful, gentle expressions. Emma, the woman in the white coat said, I'm Dr. Martinez. I understand you've been looking for your father. Emma nodded, suddenly unable to speak. We found him, Dr. Martinez continued. David Richardson is indeed a patient here. But honey, there are some things we need to talk about before we take you to see him. Some things about his condition that you need to understand. Emma's heart sank. Was her father too sick to see them? Too hurt to take care of a family? Had she brought Tommy all this way for nothing? Is he going to die? She whispered. No, sweetheart. But he's been through some very difficult things, and he's not quite the same as he was before he got hurt. Do you understand? Emma didn't understand, not really. But she nodded anyway, because understanding could come later. Right now, all that mattered was that David Richardson was alive. He was here, and in just a few minutes, she would complete the promise she'd made to her mother. Can we see him now? She asked. Dr. Martinez exchanged a look with the security guard, then nodded. Yes, Emma, let's go find your daddy. The elevator ride to the third floor felt like ascending into another world. Dr. Martinez stood beside Emma, her presence both comforting and nerve-wracking. The security guard, whose name tag read Miguel, had insisted on accompanying them, though his kind eyes suggested he was more concerned about Emma's well-being than any security threat. Emma, Dr. Martinez said as the elevator climbed, your father has been with us for 8 months now. He was injured in an explosion overseas, what we call traumatic brain injury. Do you know what that means? Emma shook her head, adjusting Tommy in her arms. The baby was starting to fuss, sensing the tension around him. Sometimes when people get hurt in their heads, it changes how they think and remember things. Your daddy might not recognize you right away. He might be confused. It doesn't mean he doesn't love you. It just means his brain needs time to remember. The elevator dinged softly as they reached the third floor. Emma's stomach twisted with a mixture of anticipation and terror. What if her father really didn't remember them? What if the journey had been for nothing? The hallway stretched before them, lined with doors marked with numbers. Room 308, 310, 312. Each step brought them closer to room 314, closer to the moment that would determine their future. There's something else, Dr. Martinez said gently as they walked. Your father has been struggling with what we call survivor's guilt. He blames himself for things that happened during the war. He's been resistant to visitors. He's convinced himself that he's too damaged to be around the people he loves. They stopped in front of room 314. Through the small window in the door, Emma could see a figure sitting in a chair by the window, staring out at the Denver skyline. Even from behind, even after 3 years, she recognized the set of his shoulders, the way he held his head. It was him. It was really him. Are you ready? Dr. Martinez asked. Emma nodded, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. This was the moment her mother had prepared her for, the moment that would either save them or shatter what little hope they had left. Dr. Martinez knocked softly and pushed open the door. David, you have some visitors. The man by the window turned slowly, and Emma's breath caught in her throat. It was her father, but changed. He was thinner than she remembered, with new lines around his eyes and a jagged scar running from his left temple to his jaw. His dark hair, once thick and carefully combed, was now shorter and threaded with premature gray. But his eyes, those were the same eyes she remembered from bedtime stories and piggyback rides and the last morning before he left for deployment. David Richardson looked at Emma with no recognition at all. His gaze moved from her face to Dr. Martinez, then to Miguel, as if trying to understand why these strangers were in his room. I told you I don't want visitors, he said, his voice hoarse from disuse. I don't know these people. Emma felt something break inside her chest. She'd traveled across 2 states, carrying her baby brother, following her mother's dying wish, and her own father didn't recognize her. But then Tommy began to cry, a loud, demanding wail that filled the hospital room. David's head snapped toward the sound, his eyes widening as he took in the baby in Emma's arms. Papa, Emma whispered, her voice barely audible over Tommy's cries. Papa, it's me. It's Emma. David stared at her, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been recognition flickering deep in his eyes. "Emma?" he said slowly, as if testing the name. "But Emma is little. Emma is 5 years old with pigtails and a gap in her front teeth." "I'm 8 now," Emma said, tears starting to fall. "My teeth grew back. Mama helped me learn to braid my own hair." David's eyes moved to Tommy, who was still crying. Whose baby is that?" This was the moment Emma had rehearsed in her head during the long bus ride. This was when she would tell him about Tommy, about Sarah, about everything. That had happened. But seeing her father's confusion, seeing how lost he looked in this sterile hospital room, the rehearsed words disappeared. Instead, she walked slowly across the room and held Tommy out toward him. "This is Tommy," she said simply. "He's your son. Mama had him after you left, but she never got to tell you because the letters stopped coming." David stared at the crying baby, his hands trembling as if he wanted to reach out, but didn't trust himself to touch something so fragile. "My son?" he whispered. "Mama said he has your eyes," Emma continued, her voice growing stronger. "She said, when you saw him, you'd remember us. You'd remember that you have a family." Something shifted in David's expression. The confusion was still there, but underneath it, Emma caught a glimpse of the father she remembered, the man who used to read to her every night, who taught her to ride a bike, who promised he'd come home from the war. "Where is Sarah?" he asked suddenly, looking around the room as if expecting her to appear. "Where's your mother?" This was the hardest part. Emma took a shaky breath and spoke the words she'd been dreading. "Mama's gone, Papa. She got sick, and she died. But before she did, she told me to find you. She said you'd take care of us." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. David's face went through a series of emotions: shock, denial, grief, and finally, a kind of devastation that Emma had never seen on an adult's face before. "Sarah's dead?" he whispered. Emma nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. David buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. For several minutes, the only sounds in the room were Tommy's continued crying and David's muffled sobs. Dr. Martinez stepped forward. "David, I know this is overwhelming, but these children have traveled a very long way to find you. Emma has been taking care of her baby brother for days." David looked up at Emma, really seeing her for the first time. He took in her rumpled clothes, her exhausted face, the way she held Tommy with the practiced competence of someone who'd been caring for him alone. "You've been taking care of him? By yourself?" Emma nodded. "Mama taught me how before she got too sick. I can make bottles and change diapers and everything. But Tommy needs his papa now. We both do." Something in David's expression began to change. The confusion was still there. The grief was still raw. But underneath it all, Emma saw a flicker of the protectiveness she remembered from childhood. The way he used to check her closet for monsters. The way he'd pull her close during thunderstorms. "Can I?" he started, then stopped. "Would it be okay if I held him?" Emma's heart leaped. She stepped closer to her father's chair and carefully placed Tommy in his arms. David held his son awkwardly at first, as if he'd forgotten how to hold a baby, but gradually his movements became more natural. Tommy's cries began to quiet as David held him, and for a moment, the three of them formed a tableau that looked almost like a family. "He's so small," David whispered, his voice full of wonder. "How old is he?" 3 months, Emma replied, settling into the chair beside her father's. "Mama said you'd love him." "She was right," David said softly, and Emma heard an echo of the father she remembered. "What else did she tell you about me?" Emma thought about her mother's letter, about all the conversations they'd had during Sarah's final weeks. "She said you were a good man who got hurt in the war. She said the war changed you, but that didn't mean you stopped being our papa. And she said ... Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. She said she never stopped loving you, even when the letters stopped coming. David's eyes filled with tears. I stopped writing because I thought I was protecting you. I thought if I stayed away, if I pretended I was dead, you'd be better off without me. The things I did over there, the things I saw, I didn't want to bring that darkness home to you. But we needed you, Emma said with the devastating honesty of childhood. Mama got sicker and sicker, and she tried to hide it, but I knew. And when she died, I didn't know what to do except what she told me. Find Papa. Take Tommy to Papa. David looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and Emma saw him taking in all the ways she'd changed, all the growing up she'd been forced to do in his absence. You've gotten so big, he said, his voice breaking, and so brave. Braver than I've been. I'm not brave, Emma replied. I was scared the whole time. On the bus, in the taxi, walking through the hospital. But Mama said sometimes you have to do scary things because they're the right things to do. Dr. Martinez had been standing quietly by the door, but now she stepped forward. David, we need to talk about what happens next. Emma and Tommy are going to need somewhere to stay, and there are legal considerations. They stay with me, David said immediately, his voice stronger than it had been since they'd entered the room. However that works, whatever I need to do, they stay with me. I won't lose them again. David, you're still recovering. Taking care of 2 children, especially a baby ... Then I'll recover faster, he interrupted. I'll do whatever therapy you want, take whatever medication you think I need, but I'm not letting them go into the system. I'm their father. Emma felt a surge of hope so strong it made her dizzy. This was what her mother had believed would happen, that when David saw his children, when he understood they needed him, he would find the strength to be their father. Again, Tommy had fallen asleep in David's arms, his tiny face peaceful against his father's chest. David stared down at him with an expression of protective love that Emma recognized from her earliest memories. There's a family housing unit here at the hospital, Dr. Martinez said slowly, for patients who are transitioning back to independent living. If you're serious about this, David, if you're committed to your recovery, we might be able to arrange temporary housing while we work out the legal guardianship issues. I'm serious, David said, and Emma heard the determination in his voice. More serious than I've been about anything since I got here, Dr. Martinez nodded. I'll make some calls. In the meantime, Emma, you look exhausted. When's the last time you ate a real meal? Emma tried to remember. The sandwich on the bus felt like days ago, though it had only been that morning. I don't know. Let's get you both some food, Dr. Martinez said. And Emma, you did an incredible thing, bringing your brother here. Your mother would be very proud of you. As they prepared to leave the room to make arrangements, David reached out and took Emma's hand. His palm was warm and calloused, exactly the way she remembered from childhood. Emma, he said quietly, I know I haven't been the father you deserved. I know I left you and your mother when you needed me most. But I promise you, from this moment on, I'm going to do everything I can to make up for that. We're going to be a family again. Emma squeezed his hand, feeling something settle in her chest that had been unsettled since the moment she'd found her mother's cold hand in the trailer back in Cedar Falls. We already are a family, Papa, she said simply. We just needed to find each other again. As they walked toward the cafeteria, David carrying Tommy, Emma holding her father's free hand, she caught their reflection in the hospital's polished floor. They looked like what they were, a family that had been broken and was slowly learning how to heal. The journey from Montana was over. The journey back to being whole was just beginning. Behind them, room 314 stood empty, but it no longer felt like a place of isolation and despair. It had become the room where a family was reunited, where a father remembered his purpose, and where two children who had traveled across states with nothing but hope and determination finally found the home they'd been searching for. The afternoon sun streamed through the hospital windows, casting long shadows across the hallways. Somewhere in the distance, Emma could hear the normal sounds of hospital life, voices over intercoms, the soft beeping of machines, the whispered conversations of families dealing with their own crises and celebrations. But for the first time in months, Emma wasn't listening for signs of trouble or preparing for the next challenge. She was simply walking beside her father, her baby brother safe in his arms, finally able to be what she'd never really been allowed to be before. Just a little girl, whose biggest worry was what they were going to have for dinner. The future was still uncertain. There would be paperwork and legal proceedings, therapy sessions, and difficult conversations. David would have to continue his recovery while learning to be a father to a baby he'd never known existed and reconnecting with a daughter who'd grown up in his absence. But for now, in this moment, walking through the corridors of Denver Veterans Hospital, they were together. And sometimes Emma thought, remembering her mother's voice, being together was enough to start with. The family housing unit at Denver Veterans Hospital was nothing like the trailer Emma had called home in Cedar Falls, but it felt more welcoming than any place she'd been since leaving Montana. It consisted of 2 small bedrooms, a kitchenette, and a living area with a fold-out couch. Most importantly, it was theirs, at least temporarily. Emma sat cross-legged on the carpet, watching her father attempt to assemble a crib that the hospital staff had provided. David's hands shook slightly as he tried to fit the pieces together, a side effect of his medication that he tried to hide, but Emma had already noticed. His jaw was set with determination, though, and she could see echoes of the man who used to fix her broken toys and build her elaborate blanket forts. "The instructions say Part A connects to Part B," David muttered, holding up 2 pieces of white painted wood that clearly didn't match. "Papa, I think you're holding it upside down," Emma said gently. David paused, looked at the piece in his hand, then slowly turned it around. His face broke into the first genuine smile Emma had seen since their reunion. "You're right. When did you get so smart?" "Mama said I got it from you," Emma replied, then immediately wished she hadn't mentioned Sarah. She was still learning to navigate these conversations, still figuring out which memories brought comfort and which brought pain. But David's smile didn't fade. Instead, he set down the crib piece and looked at Emma with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Tell me about her, about your mother. What was she like after I left?" Emma considered the question carefully. There was so much to tell. Sarah's quiet strength during the long months when letters stopped coming, the way she worked extra hours sewing to keep food on the table, how she sang lullabies to Tommy even when she could barely breathe. But there were also the harder truths, the nights Emma heard her mother crying, the way Sarah grew thinner each month, the gradual surrender in her eyes as the illness took hold. "She was brave," Emma said finally. "Even when she was scared, she was brave. Like when the car broke down and we had to walk 3 miles to the grocery store in the snow. She made it into an adventure, like we were explorers discovering the North Pole." David's hands had stilled on the crib parts. "She always did that, turned problems into games. She kept your picture on her nightstand," Emma continued. "Every night before bed, she'd look at it and tell you about our day like you were still there listening. She'd say, 'David, Emma learned to multiply fractions today,' or 'David, the neighbor's cat had kittens and Emma named them all after presidents.'" Something flickered across David's face, pain, regret, love, all mixed together. "I should have been there." "She knew you wanted to be," Emma said with the wisdom of a child who'd heard this conversation play out in her mother's one-sided talks with the photograph. "She said the war took you away from us, but it didn't take us away from you. She said someday you'd remember that." Before David could respond, Tommy woke from his nap with a lusty cry that filled the small apartment. Emma started to get up, but David was already moving toward the portable bassinet. "I've got him," he said, lifting Tommy with growing confidence. The baby's cries intensified, and David looked helplessly at Emma. "What does that kind of cry mean?" Emma smiled. "He's hungry. The bottles are in the kitchenette. I made 3. This morning." As David prepared Tommy's bottle, Emma watched him carefully. In the 3 days since their reunion, she'd been cataloging all the ways he was different from the father she remembered, and all the ways he was exactly the same. The tremor in his hands was new, as were the medications he took each morning. And the way he sometimes paused mid-sentence, searching for words that used to come easily, but the way he hummed unconsciously while working, that was the same. The way he automatically checked the bottle's temperature on his wrist, despite having only been a father to Tommy for 3 days, that was instinctive, unchanged. And the way he looked at both his children, like they were the most precious things in the world, that was exactly as Emma remembered. "Dr. Martinez wants to see us later today," David said as he settled into the rocking chair with Tommy. "To talk about school for you, and about the legal stuff." Emma's stomach tightened. She'd been dreading this conversation. "What kind of legal stuff?" "Custody paperwork, mostly. Making sure I'm officially your guardian. Getting Tommy's birth certificate updated. Normal things that should have been done months ago if I'd been the father I should have been." "You're being the father you should be now," Emma said firmly. "That's what matters." David looked at her with surprise. "How did you get so wise, Emma Richardson?" "Mama used to say that sometimes kids have to grow up fast, but that doesn't mean they stop being kids. She said I was allowed to be both, grown up when I needed to be, and little when it was safe to be. And is it safe now to be little?" Emma considered this. For months, she'd been the one making sure her mother took her medicine, the one watching Tommy while Sarah rested, the one planning their escape from Cedar Falls after Sarah died. Being responsible had become so natural she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to let someone else take care of things. "I think so," she said softly. "But I want to keep helping Tommy. He's used to me." "Of course," David said immediately. "You're his big sister. That's not going to change." The afternoon brought Dr. Martinez and a social worker named Mrs. Chen, who had kind eyes and a briefcase full of forms. Emma sat between her father and Tommy's car seat, trying not to fidget as the adults discussed their future. "The temporary custody order is just a formality at this point," Mrs. Chen explained. "Given that you're the biological father and there are no other relatives claiming custody, the permanent guardianship should be straightforward. But David, I have to ask, are you prepared for this? Caring for 2 children while managing your own recovery?" Emma held her breath. This was the question she'd been afraid someone would ask, the one that could send her and Tommy into foster care while David continued his treatment. "I'm more prepared than I've been for anything in years," David replied, his voice steady. "These kids are my purpose, Mrs. Chen. They're what's going to make me better. The hospital has agreed to let you stay in family housing for another month while you complete the intensive outpatient program," Dr. Martinez added. "After that, you'll need to find permanent housing. Do you have any plans for that?" David was quiet for a moment. Emma knew he was thinking about the same thing she was. They had nowhere to go. The trailer in Cedar Falls was probably being cleaned out by the landlord by now. David's apartment from before the war was long gone. They were essentially starting over with nothing but each other. "I have some military benefits coming to me," David said finally. "Disability payments, housing assistance. It might take a few weeks to get everything processed, but we'll figure it out." Mrs. Chun made notes in her file. "There are resources available for veterans with families. I can connect you with some organizations that specialize in housing assistance." "What about school?" Emma asked quietly. She'd been out of school for over a week now. And while part of her was relieved to be away from the curious stares and whispered conversations about her situation, she missed the routine of it. "We'll get you enrolled somewhere as soon as we have a permanent address," David promised. "You've missed enough school because of my mistakes." "It wasn't your fault, Papa," Emma said automatically, then realized she'd been saying that a lot. Lately, her father's guilt seemed to color everything, and she found herself trying to absorb it, to make it smaller for him to carry. Dr. Martinez leaned forward in her chair. "David, one of the things we need to work on in therapy is accepting that some things were out of your control. The war, your injuries, the delays in getting treatment, those weren't your failures." "But leaving my family was," David replied. Quietly, "I chose to stop writing letters. I chose to push them away." "You chose to protect them from what you thought was damaged," Dr. Martinez corrected. "That was misguided, but it came from love, not selfishness." Emma watched this exchange with fascination. In her 8-year-old understanding, her father had been hurt and had needed time to heal. The complexities of PTSD and survivor's guilt were beyond her grasp, but she understood that the war had changed him in ways that went deeper than his physical scars. After the meeting, they walked to a nearby park. It was the first time Emma had been outside the hospital since arriving in Denver, and she found herself overwhelmed by the simple pleasure of fresh air and sunshine. Tommy slept in his stroller while Emma explored the playground equipment. "Push me on the swings, Papa," she called, settling onto a swing that was probably meant for younger children, but still held her weight. David stood behind her, his hands gentle on her back as he pushed. Higher, higher. For a few minutes, they existed in a bubble of normalcy, a father pushing his daughter on a swing while her baby brother napped nearby. Emma closed her eyes and let herself imagine this was their regular routine, that they lived in a house nearby and came to this park every afternoon. "Emma," David said as she swung back toward him, "I need to tell you something about what happened to me in the war." Emma's stomach clenched, but she kept swinging. "Okay, there was an explosion. A bomb that was meant to hurt American soldiers. I was with 5 other men, and I was the only one who survived. For a long time, I couldn't understand why I lived when they didn't. I felt guilty for being alive when they had families too, people who loved them too." "But you have a family," Emma said, dragging her feet to slow the swing. "You have us. I know that now. But for a while, I forgot. The guilt made me forget everything except the pain. I thought if I stayed away, if I let you believe I was gone, maybe the guilt would hurt less." Emma stopped swinging and turned to face her father. "Did it?" David's laugh was hollow. "No, it made everything worse. I was so focused on the men who died that I forgot about the people who needed me to live." Emma climbed off the swing and wrapped her arms around her father's waist. He was taller than she remembered, or maybe she'd simply forgotten what it felt like to be small next to him. "Mama used to say that sad things happen, but that doesn't mean we stop living," Emma said, her voice muffled against his shirt. "She said you were fighting to come home to us, even if it took longer than we hoped." David's arms tightened around her. "She was right. I just wish it hadn't taken so long for me to remember that." They walked home as the sun was setting, painting the Denver skyline in shades of orange and pink. Tommy woke during the walk and spent the trip home looking around with wide eyes, taking in his first real glimpse of the world beyond hospital walls. That evening, as Emma helped David give Tommy a bath in the small sink, she realized something had shifted. Her father's hands were steadier, his voice more confident. The lost look that had been in his eyes since their reunion was being replaced by something else, purpose, maybe, or hope. "Tomorrow we're going to look at apartments," David said as he carefully shampooed Tommy's sparse hair. "Dr. Martinez gave me a list of places that work with veteran housing vouchers. Will they be nice?" Emma asked, supporting Tommy's head while David rinsed soap away. "They'll be ours," David said simply, "and that makes them perfect." Later, after Tommy was asleep in his crib and Emma was supposed to be in bed, she lay awake listening to her father in the next room. He was on the phone with someone, Dr. Martinez maybe, or one of the social workers, and his voice carried through the thin walls. "I know it's not going to be easy," he was saying. "I know I have a long way to go with my recovery. But those kids traveled across 2 states to find me. They believed I could take care of them when I didn't even believe it myself. How can I do anything less than prove them right?" Emma smiled in the darkness. Her mother had been right. David Richardson was still the man who had promised to come home to them. He just needed to remember how to find his way back. The next morning brought new challenges. Emma woke to find Tommy crying and David pacing the floor with him, looking frustrated and tired. "He won't stop crying," David said when he saw Emma. "I've tried feeding him, changing him, everything I can think of." Emma took Tommy and immediately felt the heat radiating from his small body. "He has a fever, Papa. We need to take him to the doctor." The trip to the emergency room was Emma's first real test of whether her father could handle a crisis. In the past, she would have been the one making decisions, figuring out what to do. But David took charge, carrying Tommy while Emma grabbed the diaper bag, speaking calmly to the triage nurse, holding Emma's hand while they waited. Tommy's fever turned out to be nothing serious, just a mild cold, but the experience showed Emma something important. Her father wasn't the same man who had left for war 3 years ago, but he was becoming someone new, someone stronger in different ways. As they walked back to their temporary home, Tommy sleeping peacefully in his stroller, Emma realized that the journey that had started in a trailer in Cedar Falls was finally coming to an end. Not because they'd reached their destination, but because they'd found something more valuable than a place to live. They'd found their way back to being a family. 6 weeks after Emma had stumbled through the hospital doors carrying Tommy, she stood in the doorway of their new apartment, holding a key that felt heavier than it should. The apartment was small, a 2-bedroom unit in a complex specifically designed for veterans and their families, but it was theirs, really, officially theirs. "Well?" David asked, shifting Tommy to his other arm. "What do you think?" Emma stepped inside, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. The living room was empty, except for the boxes they'd carried up from the moving truck, donations from various veteran support organizations that had heard their story. Sunlight streamed through windows that faced east, and she could see a small playground visible from the kitchen window. "It's perfect," she said, and meant it. The past month had been a whirlwind of appointments and paperwork. David's custody of both children was now legal and permanent. Emma was enrolled at Jefferson Elementary School, where she would start 4th grade the following Monday. Tommy had gained 2 pounds and was sleeping through the night. They had health insurance, food stamps, and a housing voucher that made their rent affordable on David's disability payments. On paper, they looked like a success story, but Emma had learned that real life was more complicated than paperwork suggested. David still had nightmares that woke the whole apartment. His medication made him foggy in the mornings, and some days the tremor in his hands was so bad he couldn't button his shirts. Emma had become expert at reading his moods, knowing when to give him space and when he needed company. "The furniture delivery is scheduled for this afternoon," David said, consulting a list written in Dr. Martinez's careful handwriting. Emma's father had started carrying lists everywhere, a coping mechanism for the memory issues that still plagued him. Beds first, then the couch and kitchen table. Emma nodded, exploring the rest of the apartment. Her bedroom was small, but had a window that looked out onto the playground. Tommy's room was right next to David's, close enough that he could hear if the baby cried at night. The kitchen was bigger than the one in their old trailer, with actual counter space and a full-sized refrigerator. "Papa," Emma said, returning to the living room where David was unpacking a box labeled Kitchen Basics. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you scared?" David paused in his unpacking, a coffee mug halfway out of the box. "About what?" "About taking care of us. About being a daddy again." David set down the mug and looked at Emma with the careful attention she'd come to appreciate about this version of her father. The old David, the one from before the war, would have given her a quick reassurance and changed the subject. This David thought before he spoke, weighed his words like they mattered. "Terrified," he said finally. "Every single day." Emma hadn't expected such honesty. "But you seem like you know what you're doing." "I'm learning. Dr. Martinez says that's what good parents do. They learn as they go, and they ask for help when they need it." David sat down on one of the unpacked boxes, bringing himself closer to Emma's eye level. "But Emma, I need you to know something. If I mess up, if I don't know how to help you with something, or I can't figure out what Tommy needs, you can tell me. You don't have to take care of everything by yourself anymore." Emma felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. "What if you get sick again? What if you forget us again?" "That's not going to happen," David said firmly. "The forgetting wasn't really forgetting. It was me trying to protect myself from feeling too much. But now I know that feeling everything, even when it hurts, is better than feeling nothing at all." Tommy chose that moment to start fussing, and David stood to tend to him. Emma watched her father bounce the baby gently, murmuring nonsense words in the soothing tone that had become second nature to him over the past weeks. "He's getting heavy," David said as Tommy settled back into contentment. "Pretty soon he'll be too big for me to carry around everywhere." "Mama used to say babies grow fast because they're in a hurry to see the world," Emma said, then felt the familiar pang that came with mentioning Sarah. It was getting easier, talking about her mother, but it still hurt. She was right about a lot of things, David said softly. "I found some of her letters yesterday when I was unpacking. The ones she sent while I was overseas, before I stopped reading them." Emma's heart skipped. "You kept them? All of them?" "Even after I convinced myself I didn't want to remember home, I couldn't throw them away." David shifted Tommy to one arm and reached into his pocket, pulling out a worn envelope. "This one has pictures of you. Want to see?" Emma took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were photographs Sarah had taken with their old digital camera. Emma missing her front teeth, Emma on her first day of second grade, Emma helping Sarah hang laundry on the line behind their trailer. But it was the letter that made Emma's eyes fill with tears. "Emma lost another tooth today," Sarah had written in her neat script. "She was so proud to show it to me, but then she got sad because you weren't here to see it. I told her you'd want to hear all about it when you got home, so she drew you a picture of her new smile. She also learned to tie her shoes this week, and she's been practicing on everyone's sneakers. Mrs. Peterson next door says Emma tied her shoes so tight she had to cut the laces to get them off." Emma laughed despite her tears. "I remember that. Mrs. Peterson was so mad." "Your mother was always good at finding the funny parts of everything," David said, "even when things were hard." The furniture arrived that afternoon, a truck full of donated items that various organizations had collected for their new start. Emma helped direct the delivery men, feeling very grown-up as she decided where everything should go. The beds came first, as promised, followed by a couch that was probably older than Emma but was clean and comfortable. The kitchen table was round and scratched, but it seated 4 people, which seemed optimistic and hopeful. "This is nice," Emma said as they sat around the table for their first dinner in the new apartment. David had made spaghetti from a jar, not as good as Sarah's homemade sauce, but perfectly acceptable. Tommy sat in a high chair they'd borrowed from the hospital, alternately banging his spoon and trying to eat the pureed carrots David was feeding him. "It feels like home," David agreed. "Or like it could be home." That night, Emma lay in her new bed in her own room for the first time in months. The mattress was firmer than her old one, and the sounds were different. Traffic instead of wind, neighbors' televisions instead of the trailer's creaking walls. But through the thin apartment walls, she could hear David humming to Tommy. The same wordless tune he'd hummed when Emma was small. The next morning brought Emma's first day at Jefferson Elementary. David walked her to school, pushing Tommy in his stroller, both of them nervous about this new milestone. What if the other kids ask about Mama? Emma had asked while eating breakfast. Tell them whatever feels right, David had replied. You don't owe anyone your whole story. Jefferson Elementary was bigger than Emma's old school, with hallways that seemed to stretch forever and classrooms full of children who'd known each other since kindergarten. Emma's teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, was young and energetic, with the kind of smile that made you want to try harder. Class, we have a new student joining us today, Mrs. Rodriguez announced as Emma stood at the front of the room, her stomach churning with nerves. This is Emma Richardson. She just moved here from Montana. A girl with braided hair raised her hand. Why did you move here? Emma looked out at the sea of curious faces and made a decision. To be with my dad, she said simply. He was hurt in the war, and now he's better, so we came to live with him. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough truth for a classroom full of 9-year-olds. The questions that followed were easier. Did she like Denver? Had she ever seen mountains? Did she know how to ski? Normal questions from kids who were more interested in friendship than tragedy. At lunch, Emma sat with the braided hair girl, whose name was Maria, and 2 other girls who seemed genuinely interested in hearing about life in Montana. For the first time in months, Emma felt like just another kid with just another story. My dad was in the war too, Maria said as they shared a bag of chips. He came back different, my mom says, but he's better now. Emma nodded, understanding that Maria was offering a kind of kinship. It takes time, she said, repeating something Dr. Martinez had told her. When David picked her up after school, Emma was bursting with stories about her day. She told him about Maria and Mrs. Rodriguez and the art project. They were starting tomorrow while he pushed Tommy's stroller home through the late afternoon sunshine. Sounds like it went well, David said, and Emma could hear the relief in his voice. It was good, Emma agreed. Different, but good. That evening, as they settled into their new routine, dinner at the round table, Tommy's bath in the apartment's real bathtub, bedtime stories in Emma's new room, Emma realized something had shifted. The constant vigilance she'd carried. For months, the feeling that she needed to be ready for the next crisis was finally starting to fade. Papa, she said as David tucked her into bed, I was thinking about what you said about being scared. What about it? I think maybe being scared is okay, as long as you don't let it stop you from trying. David smiled and kissed her forehead. When did you get so wise, Emma Richardson? I learned it from my mama, Emma said. And from you. As David turned off the light and closed her door, Emma lay in the darkness listening to the sounds of her new home. Tommy was quiet in his room. David was moving around the kitchen cleaning up from dinner, and somewhere in the building, other families were settling into their own evening routines, for the first time since that terrible morning in Cedar Falls when she'd found her mother's cold hand. Emma felt something she'd almost forgotten how to feel, safe. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that felt increasingly natural. Emma went to school, made friends, struggled with long division, and joined the after-school art club. David attended his therapy sessions, met with other veterans in a support group, and slowly began to believe that he might actually be capable of raising 2 children on his own. Tommy thrived in their new environment, hitting milestones that delighted them all, rolling over, sitting up unsupported, laughing at peekaboo games that Emma played with him for hours. But it was the small moments that convinced Emma they were going to be okay. The way David remembered to pack her lunch every morning without being reminded. The way he'd learned Tommy's different cries and could distinguish between hunger tiredness, and the need for a diaper change. The way he'd started taking pictures of everything, Tommy's first bite of solid food, Emma's artwork from school, the three of them together on the apartment's small balcony. "I want to remember everything this time," he'd explained when Emma teased him about becoming obsessed with the camera. "I missed too much already." One evening in late October, as Emma was doing homework at the kitchen table while David made dinner and Tommy played on a blanket on the floor, Emma realized this was what her mother had envisioned when she'd told Emma to find her father. Not perfection, not a fairy tale ending, but this, a family that was healing, learning, growing together. "Papa," Emma said, looking up from her math worksheet, "I think Mama would be happy about how we're doing." David paused in his stirring of the pasta sauce and looked around their small apartment, at Tommy babbling to his plastic keys, at Emma bent over homework, at the pictures they'd hung on the walls that were slowly making the space feel like home. "I think you're right," he said. "I think she'd be proud of all of us." That night, after Tommy was asleep and Emma was supposed to be finishing her reading assignment, she snuck out of her room to find David sitting on the couch, looking through the photo album they'd been creating of their new life together. "Can I see?" she asked. David made room for her on the couch, and together they flipped through the pages. There was Emma's first day of school, Tommy's 6-month doctor visit, their first family dinner in the new apartment. David had even included some of the old photos Sarah had sent him, creating a visual bridge between their past and present. "We look like a real family," Emma said, studying a picture David had asked a neighbor to take of the three of them at the playground. "We are a real family," David corrected gently. "We always were. We just had to find each other again." Emma curled up against her father's side, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, listening to the quiet sounds of their home, the refrigerator humming, Tommy's soft breathing from the baby monitor, the distant sounds of their neighbors. Living their own lives, she thought about the journey that had brought them here, the bus ride across 2 states, the frightening walk through Denver's streets, the moment she'd first seen her father in that hospital room. It seemed like a lifetime ago, but it had only been 2 months. "I'm glad Mama told me to find you," Emma said sleepily. "I'm glad you listened to her," David replied, his arm tightening around her. "I'm glad you were brave enough to save us all." Emma smiled in the darkness, finally understanding something her mother had tried to tell her in those last difficult weeks. Sometimes the best thing you can do for the people you love is refuse to give up on them, even when they've given up on themselves. Sometimes love means crossing states with a baby in your arms. Sometimes it means believing in a future that seems impossible. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it means discovering that the journey you thought was ending was actually just the beginning of something better than you ever dared to hope for. Spring arrived in Denver with an explosion of color that reminded Emma why her mother had always loved this season. Cherry trees bloomed along their street, painting the sidewalks pink with fallen petals, and the playground outside their apartment window came alive with the sounds of children who had been cooped up all winter. Emma sat at the kitchen table, carefully writing in the journal Mrs. Rodriguez had assigned for their spring writing project. The prompt was simple: write about a time that changed your life. While her classmates wrote about moving to new houses or getting pets, Emma found herself staring at the blank page, overwhelmed by how much life could change in less than a year. "Writer's block?" David asked, settling Tommy in his high chair. "For lunch." At 10 months old, Tommy was a chubby, happy baby who had learned to clap his hands and say "Dade" with enthusiastic frequency. He still hadn't said Emma, much to her pretended annoyance. "I don't know where to start," Emma admitted. "Too much has happened." David spooned mashed bananas into Tommy's eager mouth while considering her dilemma. "Maybe start with the most important moment, the one that made everything else possible." Emma thought about this. Was it the morning she found her mother's cold hand? The moment she decided to take Tommy and find their father? The instant David first recognized her in that hospital room. Or was it something smaller, quieter, like the first night in this apartment when she'd felt truly safe for the first time in months? "Papa," she said slowly, "do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't found you?" David's hand stilled on the baby spoon. This wasn't a conversation they'd had before, though Emma sensed it had been lurking in both their minds. "Every day," he said quietly, "and it terrifies me." "But I did find you," Emma said, as much to reassure herself as him. "And you remembered." "U.S. You reminded me who I was supposed to be," David corrected. "There's a difference." Tommy banged his hands on his high chair tray, demanding attention and more bananas. As David fed him, Emma watched her father's face. The haunted look that had been there when she first found him was gone, replaced by something she'd never seen in the old pictures from before the war, a kind of peaceful contentment. The past 8 months had changed all of them. Emma had learned that being brave didn't mean not being scared. It meant doing what needed to be done despite the fear. David had learned that healing wasn't about forgetting the bad things that had happened, but about not letting them define his future. And Tommy, oblivious to the journey that had brought them together, had simply learned that he was loved unconditionally by the two people who mattered most. "I have an idea for your story," David said as he wiped banana from Tommy's face. "Why?" "Don't you write about the day we became a family? Really became one, I mean." Emma considered this. There had been many days that could qualify. The day they'd moved into the apartment, her first successful parent-teacher conference, the morning David had made pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse, just because he remembered Emma mentioning she liked them. But she knew which day he meant. It had been 3 months ago, on a cold February morning when Tommy had spiked a fever of 104 degrees. Emma had woken to the sound of his crying and found David in the nursery, holding a listless baby, while trying to take his temperature with shaking hands. "We need to go to the hospital," David had said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. The next 6 hours had been a blur of emergency rooms and worried consultations with doctors. Emma had sat in uncomfortable waiting room chairs, watching her father pace and trying not to think about all the ways their new life could fall apart if something happened to Tommy. But it was what happened during those long hours that had cemented them as a family. David hadn't fallen apart. He'd stayed calm, asked the right questions, held Emma's hand when she got scared, and advocated fiercely for his son's care. When Tommy's fever finally broke and the doctors determined it was just a severe case of Rosella, scary but not dangerous, David had cried tears of relief and pulled both his children close. "I thought I was going to lose him," he'd whispered into Emma's hair. "I thought I was going to lose both of you." "You're not going to lose us, Papa," Emma had whispered back. "We're not going anywhere." That was the day Emma had stopped seeing her father as someone who needed to be taken care of and started seeing him as someone she could depend on. That was the day David had stopped seeing himself as broken and started believing he could actually be the father his children deserved. Emma picked up her pencil and began to write. "The day that changed my life wasn't actually one day. It was a lot of days, all leading to the moment I realized I wasn't alone anymore." As she wrote, the sounds of her family filled the kitchen around her. Tommy babbling as he played with his food, David humming while he cleaned up lunch dishes, the distant sounds of children playing in the courtyard below. These were the sounds of home, not the trailer in Cedar Falls, not the sterile hospital rooms, but this apartment where they'd learned to be a family. "Emma," David said as she finished the first paragraph of her story, "I want to show you something." He disappeared into his bedroom and returned with a manila envelope Emma had never seen before. Inside were official-looking documents with gold seals and fancy script. "What are these?" Emma asked. "Adoption papers," David said, his voice careful and quiet. "For Tommy, to make sure he's legally my son, no matter what happens, And ... He pulled out another set of documents. Papers to officially change your last name to Richardson, if you want to. I know your mother never married me, so legally you're still Emma Sullivan. But if you want to be Emma Richardson... Emma stared at the papers, her heart racing. She'd been Emma Sullivan for almost 9 years. It was the name on her school records, her medical files, her memories of life with her mother. But Sullivan had always felt temporary, like something she was borrowing. Until she found where she really belonged. Would I still be Mama's daughter? She asked. Always, David said firmly. These papers don't change your history, Emma. They just make official what's already true, that you're my daughter and I'm your father, no matter what, Emma thought about this as she held the adoption papers. Making it official felt important, like a promise that couldn't be broken. But more than that, it felt like the final step in a journey that had started in a trailer in Montana and led them here, to this kitchen table where they'd shared hundreds of meals, to this life they'd built together one day at a time. I want, Tio, she said finally. I want to be Emma Richardson. David's smile was radiant. Then that's what we'll do. That afternoon, they walked to the courthouse together, David pushing Tommy in his stroller, Emma skipping alongside them with the important papers clutched in her backpack. The legal proceedings were surprisingly simple, just a matter of signatures and stamps and official declarations of what everyone already knew to be true. But when the clerk handed Emma a new birth certificate with Emma Richardson, printed in official type, she felt something shift inside her chest. She belonged somewhere now. She had a family name that meant something, roots that went deeper than survival and circumstance. How does it feel? David asked as they walked home through the spring sunshine. Different, Emma said, then laughed at her own inability to articulate. Something so important. Good different. Like I've been Emma Richardson all along, but now everyone else knows it too. That evening, they celebrated with takeout pizza and ice cream for dessert. Tommy, now officially Thomas David Richardson, according to his new birth certificate, celebrated by throwing Cheerios on the floor and laughing when their elderly neighbors. Kat appeared at the sliding door to eat them. We should call Dr. Martinez, Emma said as she helped clean up after dinner. She wanted to know about the adoption. Already did, David said. She said she's proud of how far we've all come. Emma thought about their last session with Dr. Martinez just a few weeks ago. It had been what the doctor called a check-in, rather than a therapy session, a chance to see how they were adjusting to their new normal. The remarkable thing about your family, Dr. Martinez had said, is how you've all learned to take care of each other. Emma, you learned that you don't have to carry everything alone. David, you learned that being vulnerable doesn't make you weak. And Tommy gets to grow up knowing he's loved without question. At the time, Emma hadn't fully understood what the doctor meant. But now, watching her father give Tommy a bath while singing the silly songs Emma had taught him, she began to see it. They each brought something different to their family. Emma brought resilience and wisdom beyond her years. David brought protection and stability. Tommy brought joy and a reason to hope for the future. Papa, Emma said as David was tucking her into bed, do you think Mama knows? About the adoption, I mean? David considered this seriously, the way he always did when Emma asked about her mother. I think if there's a way for her to know, she does, and I think she's proud of the choice you made today. Emma smiled in the darkness. I think so too. As spring turned to summer, their life settled into new rhythms. Emma finished 4th grade with excellent marks and a teacher's note about her maturity and kindness toward other students. David completed his intensive therapy program and was cleared to work part-time, taking a job at a veterans center where he helped other soldiers navigate their return to civilian life. Tommy learned to crawl, then to pull himself up on furniture, transforming their apartment into a constant adventure of baby-proofing and vigilant supervision. Emma became expert at entertaining him, reading him picture books and playing peekaboo games that sent him into fits of giggles. On the first anniversary of Sarah's death, they visited a Denver cemetery and planted a small tree in the memorial garden. Emma read a letter she'd written to her mother, telling her about Tommy's first steps and David's new job and the way their apartment filled with laughter every evening. "I found Papa, just like you told me to," Emma read aloud, her voice steady despite her tears. "And he's taking good care of us, just like you said he would. I still miss you every day, but I'm not sad all the time anymore. I think that's what you wanted." David planted the tree, a young cherry tree that would bloom pink every spring, while Tommy toddled around the memorial garden, fascinated by the flowers and completely unaware of the significance of the moment. "She would have loved to see him walking," David said as they watched Tommy explore. "She would have loved to see you being his daddy," Emma replied. "She always said you'd be wonderful with babies." That autumn brought new milestones. Emma started 5th grade and joined the school's debate team, discovering she had a talent for public speaking that surprised everyone, including herself. David's part-time job became full-time, and he began taking night classes toward a degree in social work. Tommy said his first word, not mama or dada, but ma, clear as a bell one October morning when she was getting ready for school. Emma burst into tears of joy, scooping him up and spinning him around the living room while he laughed and repeated "Emme" over and over again. "He knows who his big sister is," David said, capturing the moment with the camera that had become a permanent fixture in their lives. By winter, Emma realized that she rarely thought about the trailer in Cedar Falls anymore. When she did remember their old life, it felt like a story someone had told her about other people. The girl who had carried her baby brother across 2 states seemed like someone she'd known long ago. Someone brave and desperate and heartbreakingly young. She was still young, of course, still only 10 years old, still dealing with homework and friendship drama and the million small challenges of childhood. But she was also Emma Richardson now, daughter and sister, and part of a family that had chosen each other as much as blood had bound them together. On Tommy's first birthday, they threw a party in their apartment. Maria from school came along with several neighbors and a few of David's friends from the Veterans Center. Tommy wore a paper crown and smeared chocolate cake all over his high chair while everyone sang "Happy Birthday" and took pictures. Later, after the guests had gone home and Tommy was napping off his sugar high, Emma and David sat on their couch looking through the photos from the day. "Look at him," David said, showing Emma a picture of Tommy clapping his hands with delight as everyone sang to him. "He has no idea how close he came to growing up without a family." "But he didn't," Emma said firmly. "He's going to grow up with us and he's going to be happy." David pulled Emma close, and she settled against his side the way she had as a small child. "What do you think you want to be when you grow up?" he asked. Emma had been thinking about this lately. Her teacher said she was smart enough to be anything. She wanted a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, a scientist. But when Emma imagined her future, she saw herself helping other children who found themselves in impossible situations, other families who needed someone to believe in them when they couldn't believe in themselves. "I want to help kids," she said. "Kids like I was, who have to be braver than they should have to be." David nodded approvingly. "I think you'd be good at that. You've had practice." As winter deepened and their second Christmas together approached, Emma found herself thinking about the security camera footage that had captured her arrival at the hospital. She wondered if anyone still watched it, if it had become just another piece of data in some hospital database, or if the nurses sometimes told new staff about the little girl who had carried her baby brother through automatic doors and changed 3 lives forever. She hoped they still told the story. Not because she wanted to be remembered as a hero, she'd never felt like one, but because their story proved something important. It proved that love could survive unimaginable circumstances. It proved that families could be broken, and healed, and become stronger in the broken places. It proved that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was refuse to give up, even when giving up would be easier. On Christmas morning, Emma woke to the sound of Tommy laughing in his crib and David making coffee in the kitchen. She lay in her warm bed for a moment, listening to the sounds of her family beginning their day, and felt the deep contentment. That had become her normal state. She was Emma Richardson now. She had a father who loved her, a brother who adored her, and a future full of possibilities she was just beginning to imagine. The journey that had begun in a trailer in Cedar Falls had led her home, not to a place, but to the people who made wherever they were feel like home. When she finally got up and padded to the kitchen in her Christmas pajamas, David was waiting with hot chocolate, and Tommy was banging on his high chair, eager to start the day. "Merry Christmas, Emma Richardson," David said, kissing the top of her head. "Merry Christmas, Papa," she replied, and knew that her mother, wherever she was, could finally rest easy knowing her children were exactly where they belonged. 2 years had passed since Emma Richardson first walked through the doors of Denver Veterans Hospital, and she barely recognized the girl she'd been that day. Now 12 years old and in 7th grade at Lincoln Middle School, Emma had grown tall and confident, her dark hair reaching past her shoulders and her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd learned early that words mattered. She stood at the podium in the school auditorium, looking out at an audience of parents, teachers, and fellow students who had gathered for the annual Stories of Courage presentation. Emma had been selected to represent her grade, and she'd chosen to tell a story that had shaped not just her life, but her understanding of what family really meant. 3 years ago, Emma began, her voice clear and steady, "I thought courage meant not being afraid. I thought it meant being strong enough to handle anything that came your way. But I learned something different. I learned that real courage isn't about not being scared. It's about loving someone so much that you do. The scary thing anyway." In the third row, David sat with 2.5-year-old Tommy on his lap, both of them beaming with pride. Tommy had grown into a chatty, energetic toddler with his father's dark eyes and his mother's stubborn streak. He was trying to whisper something in David's ear, but David was completely focused on Emma's speech. "When I was 8 years old," Emma continued, "my mother died and I had to make a choice. I could wait for someone else to figure out what to do with me and my baby brother, or I could take him and find the one person who might be able to take care of us, our father, who was recovering in a hospital 2 states away." Emma had told this story before, to school counselors, to new friends, to the social worker who still checked in on them occasionally. But this was the first time she'd told it publicly, the first time she'd stood in front of strangers and shared the journey that had brought their family together. "The bus ride to Denver was the longest trip of my life," she said, her eyes finding David's in the audience. "Not because of the miles, but because I didn't know what I'd find when I got there. I was afraid my father wouldn't remember us. I was afraid he wouldn't want us. I was afraid I'd made a terrible mistake." Tommy had settled in David's lap, his attention caught by Emma's voice carrying over the microphone. At 2.5, he was too young to understand the story his sister was telling, but he knew it was important because all the grown-ups were listening so carefully. "But what I found," Emma continued, "was that sometimes the people we love need us to believe in them when they can't believe in themselves. My father had been hurt in the war, not just physically but in his heart and his mind. He'd convinced himself that he was too broken to be our father. But when he saw us, when he held my baby brother for the first time, he remembered who he was supposed to be." David felt tears prick his eyes as he listened to Emma's words. She was telling their story with a maturity and insight that amazed him, but more than that, she was telling it with love. There was no anger in her voice for the years he'd been absent, no bitterness about the journey she'd been forced to make. Just understanding and forgiveness that humbled him every day. "Families don't always look the way you expect them to," Emma said, her voice growing stronger. Sometimes they're created by choice instead of just by blood. Sometimes they're born from crisis and held together by determination. Sometimes the person who saves the family is the youngest one, the one everyone thinks needs to be protected. In the audience, Emma's best friend Maria wiped her eyes with a tissue. She'd heard parts of this story before, but never the whole. Thing never told with such eloquence and power. Other parents in the audience were equally moved, some thinking about their own families, their own challenges, their own definitions of courage. Today, my family is exactly what we're supposed to be, Emma concluded. My father is a social worker who helps other veterans transition back to civilian life. My brother Tommy is a typical 2-year-old who loves trucks and picture books and making messes. And I'm a 7th grader who's learned that sometimes the most important journey you'll ever take starts with a single step, even when you're too scared to know where that step will lead you. The applause was thunderous. Emma stood at the podium for a moment, taking in the sea of faces looking back at her, then walked down to where her family was sitting. David stood up, still holding Tommy, and wrapped Emma in a fierce hug. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered into her hair. "Mama would be so proud of you." Tommy reached for Emma, wanting his share of attention. Emma, tell story." "That's right, buddy," Emma said, taking him from David's arms. "I told our story." After the presentation, they were approached by several people who wanted to thank Emma for sharing her experience. A woman whose husband was currently deployed overseas shook Emma's hand and said her story had given her hope. A veteran from David's support group clapped him on the shoulder and said he was lucky to have such an amazing daughter. But it was the conversation with Mrs. Patterson, the school principal, that would change everything. "Emma," Mrs. Patterson said as they were preparing to leave, "have you ever considered writing your story down? As a book, I mean?" Emma looked surprised. "A book? About us?" "There are so many children in situations like yours was," Mrs. Patterson explained. "Kids who are dealing with family crises, kids who have to be braver than they should have to be. Your story could help them feel less alone." David saw the spark of interest in Emma's eyes. "What do you think, Em? Want to be a published author before you turn 13? That evening, after Tommy was in bed, Emma and David sat at their kitchen table, the same scratched round table they'd eaten their first meal at in this apartment, and talked about the possibility of turning their story into a book. "I wouldn't know how to start," Emma admitted. "The same way you started your speech tonight," David suggested. "With the truth, with what you remember about that time." Emma pulled out a notebook and started writing. David made coffee and settled at the other end of the table with his own laptop, working on case notes for his job while Emma explored their family's history on paper. "Papa," Emma said after she'd been writing for an hour, "do you ever wish things had happened differently? That Mama hadn't gotten sick, that you hadn't been hurt in the war, that we'd just been a normal family all along?" David looked up from his work, considering the question seriously. It was something he'd wondered about often, especially in the early days after their reunion. The what-ifs and might-have-beens that could drive a person crazy if they dwelt on them too long. "I wish your mother was still alive," he said finally. "I wish she could see what an incredible young woman you're becoming, and I wish she could watch Tommy grow up, but everything else? The journey we took to get here, the things we learned about ourselves and each other. I wouldn't change any of that. Even the scary parts? Especially the scary parts. Those are the parts that taught us who we really are." Emma nodded and went back to her writing. Over the next several months, she worked on their story whenever she had free time. David helped her organize her memories chronologically, and together they filled in details that had become fuzzy with time. The most difficult part was writing about Sarah's death. Emma had blocked out many of the specifics of that terrible morning, and remembering them was painful. But David helped her through it, sitting beside her as she wrote, holding her hand when the memories became too overwhelming. "You don't have To include everything, he reminded her during one particularly difficult writing session. You can tell the truth without sharing every painful detail. But what if someone reading it is going through the same thing? Emma asked. What if they need to know that it's possible to survive something like this? David marveled at his daughter's empathy, her instinct to help others even when it meant revisiting her own trauma. Then we'll make sure they know, he said. But we'll do it in a way that helps heal instead of hurts. Tommy often helped with the writing process, climbing onto Emma's lap and pressing random keys on her laptop or drawing pictures to illustrate the story. His presence made the work lighter somehow, reminding them that their story wasn't just about loss and struggle. It was about love and hope and the family they built together. By Emma's 13th birthday, she had completed a first draft of their story. David had connected her with a local writing group that helped young authors, and Emma spent the summer revising and polishing her manuscript with their guidance. The book was published the following year by a small press that specialized in memoirs and true stories. Finding Papa, A Family's Journey Home, became a modest success, particularly among military families and social workers who recognized the truth in Emma's words. But the real impact came from the letters, hundreds of them, from children who had read Emma's story and felt less alone in their own struggles. Kids in foster care who were waiting for permanent families. Children of deployed military parents who worried about what would happen if their parents came home changed. Young people who had lost parents and didn't know how to move forward. Emma answered every letter personally, with David's help when the situations were particularly complex. She became an unofficial advocate for children in crisis, speaking at schools and community centers about resilience in family and the power of refusing to give up. I never expected this, Emma told David one evening as they sorted through a new batch of fan mail. I just wanted to tell our story. And look what happened, David replied, reading a letter from a 10-year-old girl whose father was struggling with PTSD. You're helping other families find their way home, just like you helped us find ours. Tommy, now 3 years old and full of opinions about everything, climbed onto David's lap to look at the letters. Ma famous, he announced proudly. Mama's a helper, David corrected gently. Just like she's always been. That summer brought an unexpected opportunity. A documentary filmmaker who had read Emma's book reached out about creating a film based on their story. Emma was hesitant at first. Their story felt too personal, too sacred to share with the entire world. What if people judge us? She asked David during one of their evening talks. What if they think I'm trying to make myself look like a hero? Anyone who's lived through something like we have will understand, David assured her. And anyone who hasn't might learn something important about what families can survive when they love each other enough. The documentary process was intensive. Emma, now 14 and in 8th grade, had to balance school with interviews and filming. David took a leave of absence from his job to participate fully, and even Tommy, now articulate enough to answer simple questions, contributed his perspective on having a big sister who was really, really brave. The film, titled The Journey Home, premiered at a film festival in Colorado and was later picked up by a streaming platform. Emma watched herself on screen with amazement. The young woman being interviewed bore little resemblance to the terrified 8-year-old who had once carried her baby brother across 2 states. Look how much you've grown, David said, squeezing her hand as they watched the premiere together. We all have, Emma replied, thinking about everything that had changed since that night in the trailer when Sarah had first asked her to promise to find her father. The success of both the book and the documentary brought opportunities Emma had never imagined. She was invited to speak at conferences about childhood resilience. Universities asked her to participate in panels about military families. Child welfare organizations sought her input on policies affecting children in crisis. But through it all, Emma remained grounded in the life she'd built with David and Tommy in their small apartment in Denver. She still did homework at the kitchen table, still helped Tommy with his bedtime routine, still had regular check-ins with Dr. Martinez, who had become more friend than therapist over the years. "The remarkable thing about your family," Dr. Martinez had said during their most recent visit, "is how you've managed to use your trauma as a source of strength, rather than letting it define you negatively. Mama used to say that hard things happen, but they don't have to make you hard," Emma had replied. I think she was right. On the 5th anniversary of Sarah's death, they returned to the memorial garden where they'd planted the cherry tree. It had grown significantly, its branches now thick with pink blossoms that carpeted the ground like snow. Tommy, now old enough to understand the significance of the visit, brought a drawing he'd made of their family to leave by the tree. "Tell me about Grandma Sarah," he said, as they sat in the shade of the tree's branches. Emma and David exchanged glances. They'd been telling Tommy stories about his mother since he was old enough to ask questions, but he was finally old enough to really understand. "She was beautiful," Emma began, "and kind, and she loved us more than anything in the world. She was sick when you were born, Tommy, but she made sure you were taken care of. She made sure we found Papa so we could be a family." "She sounds nice," Tommy said solemnly. "She was the best mama in the world," David added, his voice thick with emotion. "And she would have loved watching you grow up." That evening, as they prepared dinner in their familiar kitchen, Emma reflected on how much their lives had changed since that terrible night when she'd found her mother's cold hand. She was no longer the frightened child who had packed her belongings into a backpack and set off on an impossible journey. She was Emma Richardson, published author, advocate for children in crisis, big sister, and daughter, all roles she'd grown into naturally, supported by a father who had learned to be everything his children needed. "What are you thinking about?" David asked, noticing her contemplative mood. Emma smiled, watching Tommy play with his toy trucks on the living room floor. "Just how far we've come. Sometimes I can barely remember what it felt like to be that scared little girl on the bus to Denver. She's still part of you," David said gently. "She always will be, but she's not the only part anymore." Emma nodded, understanding what he meant. The girl who had carried Tommy across 2 states would always be part of her story, but she was no longer defined by that journey. She was defined by what she'd built afterward, the family she'd fought to save, the life she'd created from the ashes of tragedy, the future she was still writing one day at a time. As Tommy climbed onto her lap for a bedtime story, Emma realized that the greatest gift her mother had given her wasn't just the instruction to find their father. It was the belief that love could survive anything, that families could be rebuilt from broken pieces, and that sometimes the smallest person in the room was exactly the right size to save everyone else. "Tell me the story about when I was a baby," Tommy demanded, snuggling against Emma's shoulder. "Once upon a time," Emma began, the same way she'd started this story hundreds of times before, "there was a little girl who loved her baby brother so much that she carried him across the whole world to find their papa." And as she told their story once again, Emma understood that this was what happy endings really looked like. Not perfect resolution, but love that persisted through everything, families that chose each other again and again, and the quiet contentment of ordinary evenings filled with the people who mattered most. 10 years had passed since that November night when 8-year-old Emma Richardson had first walked through the doors of Denver Veterans Hospital, carrying her baby brother, and searching for the father who could save them both. Now at 18, Emma stood in her cap and gown at her high school graduation, scanning the crowd for the faces that mattered most. There, in the 3rd row, David Richardson beamed with pride beside 12-year-old Tommy, who was trying his best to sit still despite his excitement. Tommy had grown into a lanky preteen with his father's serious eyes and Emma's stubborn determination. He held a homemade sign that read, "Congratulations, Emma," in colorful marker letters. As Emma walked across the stage to receive her diploma, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. Valedictorian of Jefferson High School, recipient of a full scholarship to the University of Colorado where she would study. Social work, published author of 2 books about family resilience. None of it would have been possible without that desperate bus ride a decade ago. Emma Richardson, the principal announced, graduating with highest honors and recipient of the Community Service Award. The applause was thunderous, led by David and Tommy's enthusiastic cheering. As Emma shook hands with the principal and posed for the obligatory photo, she caught sight of someone unexpected in the audience, Dr. Martinez, now graying at the temples but still wearing the same kind smile that had welcomed their fractured family so many years ago. After the ceremony, Emma was surrounded by classmates and teachers offering congratulations. But she made her way directly to her family, to the 2 people who had been her anchor through everything. "We're so proud of you," David said, pulling her into a tight hug. His voice was thick with emotion, and Emma could see tears in his eyes. "Did you see me cheering?" Tommy demanded, bouncing on his toes. "Everyone could hear me. I told them my sister was the smartest person graduating." Emma laughed and ruffled his hair. "I heard you, buddy. Thank you for being my personal cheering section." Dr. Martinez approached them with her own congratulations. "Look at you," she said to Emma. "From that scared little girl in the hospital lobby to this accomplished young woman. Your mother would be incredibly proud." "She would," Emma agreed, feeling the familiar bittersweet pang that always came with mentions of Sarah. "But I think she'd be proudest that we made it as a family." The celebration continued at their favorite restaurant, where they'd reserved a corner table for what had become their tradition for important milestones. Over the years, they'd celebrated birthdays, school achievements, David's promotion to department supervisor, and Tommy's various accomplishments at this same table. "So," David said as they waited for their food, "nervous about college?" Emma considered the question. The University of Colorado wasn't far from Denver, close enough that she could come home regularly, but far enough to give her independence. She'd chosen to live on campus, ready for the next phase of her journey. "Excited more than nervous," she said. "I can't wait to start the social work program. All those kids who wrote to me after the book came out, I want to be able to help them properly, not just through letters." "You're already helping them," Tommy pointed out. "Your second book helped lots of kids. Remember that girl from California who came to your book signing? She said reading about us made her feel brave enough to tell someone about her problems at home." Emma smiled at her brother's earnest expression. Tommy had grown up watching her work with children in crisis, attending her speaking engagements, helping answer fan mail. At 12, he had a sophisticated understanding of social issues that amazed the adults around him. "You're right," Emma said. "But I want to do more. I want to work directly with families, help them navigate the system, make sure no kid has to figure everything out alone the way I did." David reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Your mother always said you had a helper's heart. Even as a tiny kid, you were always taking care of others." "I learned from the best," Emma replied, looking at both of them. "I learned from a mama who taught me to be brave, and a papa who taught me that broken things can be fixed, and a little brother who taught me that joy is possible even after terrible things happen." Tommy beamed at being included in such grown-up conversation. "When I grow up, I want to help people too. Maybe I'll be a doctor and fix kids who get hurt." "You'd be a great doctor," Emma said seriously. "You've got the bedside manner for it. You always know how to make people feel better." As they drove home after dinner, Emma looked out at the Denver skyline, the same view she'd seen from the taxi window all those years ago, when she'd been a frightened child with a baby in her arms and no idea what the future held. Now the city felt like home in a way that Cedar Falls never had, not because of the place itself, but because of the life they'd built here together. That evening, As Emma packed for her move to the dorms, she came across a box of mementos from their journey. The original crumpled paper with David's hospital information, now laminated and framed. Photos from their early days in the family housing unit. Letters from readers of her books. Awards from various organizations recognizing her advocacy work. But it was Sarah's letter, the one her mother had hidden in her backpack during that desperate bus ride, that made Emma pause. She read it again, marveling at her mother's faith in the future none of them could have imagined. "You are stronger than you know, kinder than the world deserves, and more capable than anyone would guess," Sarah had written. At 8, Emma hadn't fully understood those words. At 18, she finally did. "Knock, knock," David said from her doorway. "How's the packing going?" "Good," Emma said, carefully placing the letter back in the box. "Papa, can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't been brave enough to make that trip? If I'd been too scared to take Tommy and find you?" David was quiet for a long moment, considering the question that had haunted all of them at various times over the years. "I think about it sometimes," he admitted. "And it terrifies me. Not just because of what might have happened to you and Tommy, but because of what would have happened to me. I was disappearing into my own guilt and pain. If you hadn't shown up that day, if you hadn't reminded me who I was supposed to be." He shook his head. "You saved all of us, Emma. Not just yourself and Tommy, me too." Emma felt tears prick her eyes. "We saved each other." "Yes," David agreed. "We did." The next morning, as they loaded Emma's belongings into David's truck for the drive to campus, Tommy was unusually quiet. Emma had expected him to be excited about having her room to himself for the first time, but instead he seemed subdued. "Hey," Emma said, sitting beside him on the front steps while David finished loading boxes. "What's wrong?" "What if you like college better than us?" Tommy asked in a small voice. "What if you decide you don't want to come home anymore?" Emma's heart broke a little at the question. She pulled Tommy close, remembering how it felt to be 12 and afraid of losing the people you loved most. "Tommy Richardson," she said firmly, "I could travel to the moon and back, and I would still come home to you and Papa. Do you know why?" Tommy shook his head. "Because you're my family. Not just because we share DNA or because we have the same last name, but because we chose each other. We fought to stay together when everything was trying to pull us apart. That kind of love doesn't disappear just because someone goes to college." Tommy smiled, the worry fading from his eyes. "Promise?" "Promise." "Besides," Emma added with a grin, "who else is going to help you with your homework when you get to high school? Papa's smart, but he's not valedictorian smart." "I heard that," David called from the truck, pretending to be offended. Drive to campus was filled with chatter about Emma's class schedule, Tommy's plans for 7th grade, and David's latest success stories from work. As they pulled up to the dormitory, Emma felt a flutter of excitement mixed with nervousness. This was it, the next chapter of her life. The first time she'd lived anywhere but with her family since that terrible night in Montana. But unlike that 8-year-old girl who had left everything behind out of desperation, Emma was leaving with confidence, with support, with the absolute certainty that she had a home to return to. As David and Tommy helped her carry boxes to her room, Emma was struck by how normal this felt. Just a family helping their daughter move to college, the same scene playing out in dorm rooms across the country. They'd traveled such an extraordinary path to reach this ordinary moment. "I love you both," Emma said as they prepared to leave. "Thank you for everything. For saving me, for raising me, for believing in me even when I didn't believe in myself. Love." "You too, Em," Tommy said, hugging her tight. "Don't forget to call." "Every day," she promised. David's hug lasted longest of all. "I'm so proud of the woman you've become," he whispered. "Your mother would be too." As they drove away, Emma stood at her dorm room window and watched their truck disappear into the distance. For the first time in 10 years, she was truly on her own, but she wasn't afraid. She carried their love with her like armor, their support like wings. That night, as Emma called home to report on her first day, Tommy's enthusiastic questions, David's gentle check-ins, she realized something profound. The journey that had begun with a terrified child carrying her baby brother through hospital doors had led to this. A young woman ready to carry hope to other families who needed someone to believe in them. The little girl who had once cried, "Mama's gone, she told me find you." Papa had found so much more than a father. She'd found her purpose, her strength, and her understanding that love, real, enduring, chosen love, could survive anything the world threw at it. And in a small apartment across town, David Richardson tucked his son into bed and thought about the miracle of second chances, of children who refused to give up, and of families that were stronger in the broken places where they'd been carefully mended back together. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.